Deputy John McGuinness. John, Deputy, 20 minutes.
Cathaoirleach, may I firstly compliment the Minister on the work that he has been doing in the department since his appointment. I think that his experience and steady hand has helped in many ways to put across policy and to, I suppose, give an understanding to people that issues that were created and needed to be addressed were being dealt with by someone that had an experience of life and experience of politics that would lend itself to the proper thought-out policy that was needed at a difficult time for this country. And I'm glad too that you're here this morning, Minister, to listen to some of the contributions that are being made. And I want to take advantage of my time to ask you a number of things in relation to the Public Accounts Committee area, because of the fact that you're an influential member of Cabinet and that you were a former chairman of that particular committee. But it's a strange thing to watch that committee in action and to see every single Thursday fantastic amounts of money being accounted for in a way that clearly proves inefficiencies within departments, governments, departments and agencies, very poor value for money being achieved on behalf of the taxpayer, and huge losses of money that seem to just go unaccounted for. Now, I remember when you were chairman of the Public Accounts Committee that we spoke about the local government audit service, and I continue to ask that that audit service and that the Comptroller and Auditor General's office be amalgamated, and that we have a position within government administration that one single organisation has the power, the expertise and the skills base necessary to do the forensic examination of accounts right across the board, leading down into the point where the taxpayers' money is spent. Similar arrangements are in place in other countries, and I can't see for the life of me why it can't be achieved here. And there's a certain, cynical or cynicism at play here when you look in at the workings of government and the Public Accounts Committee, and it's this: when you're in opposition, and that's why I'm speaking about you, everything is demanded, such as what I'm saying now. I supported that demand when my party was in government, and I stress again that if you do this, if that amalgamation were to take place, it would certainly cause a situation where maybe less money was lost, maybe greater efficiencies were achieved, and maybe greater accountability were achieved. If that were to happen, then you, as Minister for Finance, would not have to go to the extremes that you have to go to collect the taxes, because you might not need as much taxes if they weren't wasted. And the other issue I have is that when we create an agency such as Irish Water, 2.6 billion euros of taxpayers' money in funding and loans will go to Irish Water from the time it was put in place to the end of 2016. Now, these are not my figures. These are figures from the Comptroller and Auditor General. And yet, the Comptroller and Auditor General does not audit those accounts. Now, I find that extremely disturbing in a state that requires a better administration and a better audit system. And I'm asking you if you will ask the Cabinet to consider bringing Irish Water under the remit of the Comptroller and Auditor General. I don't see anything wrong with that, even if it were to be for the period until it goes off balance sheet. And I believe that to be a nonsense, by the way, because at the end of the day, the taxpayer is still on the hook for an awful lot of this stuff. So there are the two things: local government, which at one time was spending 4 billion euros of Irish taxpayers' money without a complete audit service being put in place in terms of the CNAG. And I think that it would make great sense, achieve value for money and greater efficiency if both of those organisations were amalgamated. And there is absolutely no reason why that shouldn't happen or why it can't happen. It's just a nonsense of, I suppose, department fighting over a piece of turf, their ground, and a position which is really dated and needs to be reformed. And your government was elected on the basis of reform. I want to turn to the budget and departments in terms of the SME sector. Procurement represents somewhere in the region of €9 billion in this country. And time again, I have made a case to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform relative to the fact that in some instances, and a lot, that their procurement processes are not working. You just have to take the stationary procurement process. The buying of equipment isn't working. It just isn't working. It's actually causing small businesses to go out of business. And we recently had a number of submissions from those that are affected by that process. And instead of that 9 billion filtering down to the small businesses throughout this country, it is causing those businesses to close. And when that happens, there should be an immediate turnaround by the government to ensure that the corrective measures are taken. If you look at the HSE, they are subjected now to €9 million of compensation claims. They're open for that. Now, we're told that the small businesses affected who are not paid on time, that's the reason why the 9 million compensation is coming into it, that they will be entitled to claim that 9 million. And the HSE is refusing to compensate those businesses. It is turning to its legal advisors, while the CNAG is turning to its legal advice in relation to the process. And yet, the 9 million that's due to the SMEs is not being given to them. Now, in the budget, in my opinion, not enough was done for the SME sector. I acknowledge what you did in relation to the road haulage industry. My background is in the road haulage industry, and a significant change to their cost base will be incurred because of what you did. And I think that the businesses that are affected are thankful that the government has finally acknowledged it, and acknowledged it well in the context of this budget. And that, if it's provided properly, should filter down, because everyone uses road haulage, everyone uses then the small parcel service, and it should affect, at the end of the day, the bottom lines of those companies and their ability to deliver. But there are other small businesses that I want to refer to, and they're probably the micro businesses, because when we speak about business here, it's generally Enterprise Ireland clients, it's generally IDA clients. There is some discussion in relation to the LEOs and how they are now replacing the county enterprise boards, and I think an awful lot more could have been done for that small business sector in relation to this budget. And if you look at what they're asking for, that things that affect their cost base, affect their profitability, but they have no control over. For example, the insurance business is spiralling out of control. It's doubling in terms of the cost to small businesses, and nothing has been done about it. Government will have to intervene, because businesses can't carry the burden of that cost. Commercial rates is another area, a cost that has been spoken about in this House from one administration to the other. It's a burden of tax that businesses find it difficult to pay, because as they adjust their costs that they're able to adjust, the one single cost is commercial rates that they can't touch. And yes, it's a cost that doesn't give them as much as it used to give. When I originally paid commercial rates in my business, it covers the collection of waste, it covered water, it covered all sorts of other services from the council. Now all these services are separate, but the rateable valuation of the properties and the rate applied from the local authorities just continues to go up. And now we're speaking about the equalisation. You know, rural, one administration now amalgamated with the other, and trying to form this base whereby everyone will be equal. Well, it's going to be extremely difficult for businesses to subscribe to that, because they're subscribing to an unfair tax system anyway. And somebody has to grasp that nettle. And I would have hoped, given the majority that you have in government, that you could have insisted on the Valuations Office bringing in a piece of legislation to have self-assessment put in place, where the properties could be self-assessed. And yes, you can penalise those that have massaged the figures in some way, if that were to be the case. And there would be a penalty. But for God's sake, give the small businesses a chance. Give them a chance. Because if you look at the high streets, your taxation or tax relief in terms of 1914 properties, I think that's the date, and refurbishing those, it's not happening in the high streets or in the villages of this country. They're not experiencing the upturn. And they're so far behind now that it will take a considerable amount of money for them to refurbish their properties, to maintain their businesses, because they're probably carrying legacy debt as well. And it will cost them a considerable amount of money to bring themselves back up to be in the game. But as a result of that, the high streets in this country are seriously affected. Small villages throughout the counties are badly affected. The pubs are gone, the convenience stores are gone. There's a lot of post offices under threat, be it from government policy or be it simply from turnover, people voting with their feet and purchasing their services elsewhere. And the banks are gone from them. So they're really struggling to get footfall, and it's impossible for them to do business. And nothing in this budget will give them the relief that is necessary to achieve what they want, and perhaps even to pass on a family business from one generation to another. It'll be closed before the next generation picks it up. And that's unfortunate, because we are a country of small businesses, of budding entrepreneurs, those that make it in the technology sector, and we've seen it in the Web Summit. And I'm deeply disappointed what has happened in relation to that. And it disturbs me to see a government minister say, give us the money back. And I do think that we need to maintain the positive profile of this country in relation to that Web Summit, information technology, and the future and what it holds in terms of job prospects for the young entrepreneurs that are involved in that area. And something a lot more positive needs to be done. And we should not just leave it at the departure of not only that Web Summit, but other associated companies that are based in Ireland, that are employed in Ireland, and that are now leaving here. Why not ask those that are involved to meet a subcommittee of the Cabinet, to sit down and talk about this? Because I know from trade abroad that they look to Ireland for innovation, for creativity, and for a picture of the future as we see it in terms of technology. If we lose the basis of all of that, if we lose the core of interest that creates a young entrepreneur to create the next big deal in the world of IT, we will damage that profile. And I think that we have been damaged already in relation to the departure of the Web Summit. Forgetting who said what to who and who got money. Let's stop that debate. And let's intervene and say, we are interested, and let's see how we can rebuild that relationship and get that Web Summit back on track. It is vital, in my opinion, to the future of this country and to the future of young people who will work as young entrepreneurs from this country and add to the trade that sector is doing abroad in many difficult markets, and influencing the input of Irish business people to huge projects in lands where we would have never been involved in trade before. And I think it's essential, Minister, that we take some steps in relation to that. I want to touch on revenue, and I agree that revenue have a difficult job to do. I agree with a lot of their approaches, but something has to be said about the penalties, the tax and the interest, and how we approach that. For those that avoid tax and that attempt to blatantly avoid it, I have no truck with them. But I do have sympathy for someone who is caught in the payment of tax, even be it the property tax, or any of the other mainstream taxes, that are caught with all of these penalties and interest. Something has to be done to give a softer side of the revenue to those people, to give them some hope of being able to finish their bills, pay their way, but not in the same draconian way that is applied in the context of those penalties and interests. And I believe that firmly. And it could be said of that issue in relation to, is it Airbnb? Let's find some way of dealing with that is sympathetic towards what was trying to be achieved by those that were legitimately trying to make some extra money, and then the taxation system. I think that that's the way it should work. And I would appeal to you to look at that when it's being sorted. The other issue that has come across my desk is in relation to the ESB pensions and that issue. You know, again, with some imagination, surely a solution could be found for those people who are now suffering because they're not in payment of full pension. And surely that Act, I think it's 2012, could be revisited to look at the responsibility of companies to deal with their employees and their retired employees in a far fairer way. And I would suggest that because we're going down the road of stealth taxes, because it's a tax everywhere now, a tax, you know, your water tax, your road tax and so on, we need to look at the income from people. You increased, or it was increased by the government, the old age pension. €3 it was suggested. Well, it might come as a surprise now that in the context of equalisation of rents, the local authorities are looking at increasing the rent of those that are on pensions by €3 a year. So you're giving in one hand and the state is taking back in the other. And you introduce legislation on fuel. It immediately impacts on the older population in this country. They have a very limited income. They have no way of improving their income. They're taxed. I think we should be fairer to them. And I think it's a fairer society that we need to aim for. But allowing the local authority to take back what you've just given them is just a nonsense. It does not improve their lot, in spite of the bad times that we're in. And they will continue to increase the commercial rate. You know, which it just doesn't make sense. There's very little service now from local authorities. Very little drop in their staff numbers if they're you know, giving services out for housing, or if they're outsourcing their refuse collection and so on, as they have done. Nothing much has changed. The status quo remains. And I think that has to change. Likewise, in relation to your 9%, I welcome that. It has proven to be a success story. But what about looking at small builders who carry out extensions and who want to get back into the game? What about giving them some sort of relief in terms of the VAT rate for a period, so that they can become cost effective, so that a person buying in the extension or wanting something done with the house in terms of refurbishment can get it maybe that little bit cheaper? And these are the innovative measures, I think, that you could have applied beyond what you did. I'm not critical of what you did. Beyond all of what you did, I think a lot more could have been done. And I think in doing that, it would have been self-financing, because you would have generated that activity in the economy that would have given you a greater tax base. And I think you do need to look at it. And while everyone talks about taxing the rich and taxing the wealthy, well, bad taxes drive out good money, and that's what's been happening. Maybe we need to look at attracting the wealthy in here so that they can create wealth, create employment, and be beneficial. And I wonder in relation to the corporate tax, 12.5%, and they talk about all the main companies that are here through the IDA. How many of those were asked in terms of their corporate social responsibility? Will you pay an extra 1% in your tax to give the country a break because we gave you a break for long enough? I think they would respond positively. We have a company in Kilkenny, and I'm sure they're right across the country, and without hesitation, they give to the marginalised. They give to the city itself, and they try to improve the lot. And maybe as a measure that helped the country, they would consider giving more in their taxes. I know no one wants to give that much, but I think that there are companies there that would consider something different and would consider a different approach. And last but not least, I want to deal with what was mentioned by a number of members here, and that's the primary medical cert. And again, dealing with marginalised people, they're on limited incomes, and they're dealing with all of these extra charges. The primary medical cert it doesn't work. It's a joke, and it's not consistent across the country. And it's the Department of Finance, I understand, that deals with that, and it's administered then elsewhere. But I would ask that we would look at that and make it a bit more flexible, and make it a bit, again, fairer for the people that we represent.
Thank you, Deputy.